Hello and welcome to part 2 of First Day to Test Day. Hey, pop open that chat again. Tell us who you are and where you are so we can see who all is participating in today's workshop. And while you're doing that, let me do some quick logistics. First, I'm Christina Smeckens. I'll be your presenter for part 2 as well as part 3 and 4 of First Day to Test Day. This is a 4-part series, and each part is on a different day. And that allows you some time to play with the strategies before we then give you a little bit more. Each part is about 75 minutes. And after viewing all 4 parts, and you need to do this by October 15th. So even if you can't catch them live, if you watch all parts by October 15th, then we'll send you a completion certificate via email. Let me also remind you that the recordings are available for a year, and that includes all the chats. So it's by October 15th that you watch the videos in order to get a PD certificate of credits, but you can keep watching those different sessions and recordings all year long. What a great review. All right. Also, to access those recordings, you're going to use the same link that got you here to this part 2. It will also be where all 4 recordings will be housed. We emailed you a handout previously, and so we'll utilize that throughout this part 2, 75 minutes, but it's also in the handouts tab. Right next to the chat in the handouts tab, you can access it there as well. Okay. There's a secret site for this workshop. You're going to hear and see a lot of strategies and ideas, but you're going to want some of those digital resources. And so we've previously emailed you about how to access the secret site for First Day to Test Day. Let me go ahead quickly and just share my screen. When you access the secret site, it's organized by the 4 parts. And so you can click on any of those parts. Here's part 1, and see all of the digital resources and the Google Docs videos and so much more. Again, you can always go back to all 4 parts and then click on the next part. Today, we're going to be utilizing part 2 of the secret site. So it has different resources, Google Docs and such. Each part becomes live on the secret site when we actually have the session. And so parts 3 and 4 aren't yet available, but parts 1 and 2 are. Okay, so secret sites have no expiration date. So it's not going to go away. You don't have to hurry up and download everything. So just know it's there and continually access the resources as you need them. Okay, I'm pre-recording this so that I can be live in the chat when you're viewing this. And so those of you that are watching live, this is that interactive virtual workshop. So if you have a question during the workshop, just pop it into the chat. I'm right there to answer it. And finally, if you have any questions at any point during the workshop, you can email us at workshops@smeckenseducation.com. My team is ready to help you so that you have the best experience possible. All right, let's dive into part 2. So we're going to talk about communicating our ideas, our inferences, our answers to reading comprehension questions, how to communicate those in writing. So let's all just right now flip to page 3 in our handout. Okay, this looks just like it did in part 1. I just want to kind of remind you where we are in the scaffold. We talked about that this has to be a year-long focus. You don't prepare for test day during a 2-week blitz. You have to be working on this all year long. It's not a unit. It's all year long. When we're reading in science and social studies and ELA and business classes, every course, we're reading texts and we're writing about them, and we work on it all year long. What we did in part 1 was identify the baby steps or the scaffold to get game day ready. And there it is on page 3. What we're going to talk through is part 2. let me quickly connect what we're going to do today in part 2 with what we did last time in part 1. All right. As you flip now to page 3, let's look here at reading voice, thinking voice, and our signs. Remember our signs? And we learned in part 1 that readers are thinkers. And so we read a little bit, we have a thought. We read a little bit, we have a thought. And if our kids don't even know they should be thinking while reading, they're never going to get it. So we worked a lot in part 1 about reading voice, thinking voice, how to track or record our thoughts, and how all of that aids in comprehension. We also talked about how these two voices work together to make inferences. In part 1, we talked about an inference is when you figure out something big that the author didn't say. He implied it, but never said it. You used your reading voice, saw text clues. You put them together with your background knowledge, your thinking voice, your thoughts, and you figured out something big. We call that answer an inference. Remember the silhouette head? The idea that you see a detail and you have a thought, but then you see another detail and it makes you think something else. And you're starting to put together these details and, oh, I know what the main idea is. I know what the author's perspective is. I know how the video and visual enhances this message. Those are all inferential questions that require kids to put clues together. So that was all part 1. Now let me pause and say, if reading voice and thinking voice and annotation and note taking and the silhouette head and putting details together to make inferences, if all of that is, what's she talking about? Then you need to watch part 1 because part 2 won't make any sense. Go back, watch part 1, and then watch part 2. Or if some of that needs to be reviewed, go back. You guys, don't rush the implementation of the ideas from part 1 to start doing ideas from part 2, because part 2 is all about connecting their reading and thinking with a written product. Top left of this page here, connecting their thinking from the reading with a written product. All right, you guys, they can't write what they don't know. That's why I worked big, hard, real focused in part 1 on this idea of voices help us make inferences. Because today we're going to talk about how to make those or turn those inferences into written constructed responses. And kids can't write their thinking if they didn't have any thinking. So our first goal has to be reading, thinking, and orally being able to answer our questions to demonstrate the making of inferences. Teacher catching the thinking on a silhouette head on the whiteboard. If we can't do that, we're not ready for part 2. Not that you're not ready to learn it. You're not ready to implement what you're going to learn in part 2. So just be conscious of that. Part 2 is putting our thoughts into a written product. Okay, so readers make inferences, right? Main idea, text structure, how this idea is related to that idea, and we want them to write constructed responses. And some of you have been teaching your students formulas for writing a constructed response, which is great. Maybe you're using yes, ma'am. Maybe you're using race or ACE or RAP or CER or some other formula. All of that is great, but I want you to recognize that if they don't have an answer, they didn't make an inference, they have nothing to write. So we're on purpose doing writing about our thinking in part 2, and part 1 was doing the thinking. Okay, so when it is time to teach kids how to put their thoughts into a written product, we need to honor that they need to include 3 ingredients. That's what state assessments, national assessments are looking for in brief constructed responses. 3 ingredients. Let's look at them across the top of this page here. 3 ingredients. All right, so first, well, they need to give the answer, right? They didn't find the answer, they inferred the answer. And so they have to give their answer. And right there below the pink answer or inference, it says repeat keywords from the question or the directions or the prompt, and then give your answer. And I know many of us teach kids to do that. So you got to give the answer. What is the main idea? What text structure is it? What is the author's purpose? Whatever the question was. The second part has to include details from the text, or what many of us refer to as evidence, textual evidence. And this has to include multiple pieces of evidence. Some states require only 2. Some state assessments require 3 or more. For every inference, for every answer, for every reason they give, they have to give at least 2 pieces of evidence. So we have these additional sentences in the middle of the response. Then there needs to be some kind of explanation, some kind of elaboration, clarification. How does the inference and the evidence go together? How do they fit? What do you mean? So that explanation sentence usually rounds out constructed responses and what we're looking for. And that's what these scorers are looking for. Okay. So now I just want to show those of you who are utilizing the yes ma'am formula that the first M, me and my thinking made the inference. Then the 2 A's, the next couple sentences, those are author details. A for author, author details. And then the explanation, the final sentence, how does it all fit? That's again M, me and my thinking. So that QAR, author and me, we're those of you using yes ma'am or considering yes ma'am, that's an author and me. It's a combination of me and my thinking sentences with author sentences. But what I want you to realize is if you're using yes ma'am, I know it's 4 letters, but you're doing all 3 parts, all 3 key ingredients. Let me talk to my race friends out there, or ACE or racer or some slight variation. You want them to restate keywords and give the answer. You want them to cite, C for cite the evidence, and explain it. Bam, you're doing the 3 parts. CER is another very common formula. The claim. What is the answer? I'm claiming that this is the answer. I made this inference. I drew a conclusion. C is for claim or conclusion. And then E is for evidence. Support that claim with textual evidence. A couple sentences of textual evidence, and then explain your thinking or reasoning. What is your reasoning? What's your explanation for how those fit together? You guys, here's my point. It really doesn't matter what formula you use. All of them are tapping the same 3 ingredients: the answer, the details, the conclusion or explanation. This is awesome. This is the good news. The good news is we know that they understand I gotta give the answer and I have to explain why I think that. My evidence and my explanation. That's the why. Remember when we were talking in part 1 that all of these assessments require kids to tell them the answer and why you think that? Part A, which sentence best describes the main idea of the passage? Part B, why do you think that? Which details support your choice? Constructed responses, 2 parts. What is the answer? And why do you think that? What and why? What and why? And I pushed so hard at the end of part 1 saying, make your classrooms evidence-based. Do not settle for right answers in class discussions about text. Push kids for why do you think that? What is the textual evidence? What details in the passage support that? Push them for the why, what and why. But that was all oral, right? Class discussions. We were just working on their thinking. All right, this is all going to transfer into their written products. Let me show you a little bit more here. Let's look on the right column of this page. And up near the top, it talks or it shows you kind of this readers, writers, reciprocal process. Okay, let's all just quickly identify the reading process to figure out something in reading, first, you collect the details with your reading voice. Then you put your thoughts together about those details. And then you figure out the answer. Okay, now, watch this. But when they have to write their response, their constructed response, they have to lead with what is the answer to the question they just figured out. They collected details, put them together, and in the neck came up with the answer. But the first sentence they write is the answer. They'll repeat keywords from the question, and then they'll give their answer. Whoa, 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 whoa. Do you see what's happening right now? As a reader, we start on the outside and we end in the neck. But when it's time to write your response, you lead with the answer. It's like a topic sentence. And then you support it with the details. And then we're going to explain it using the middle of the head thinking. I think you got to tell kids this. I think you have to tell the children of the reciprocal nature. The last thought you had as a reader is the first thought you have as a writer. I think showing it in color, huge. Kids start to get this. Then after giving the answer, the inference, you got to give me the why, what, and why. Why is going to include textual evidence. So now I go outside and I pull on the details that help me get there. Then I'm going to go into explain my thinking, and that explanation of my thinking, where do you suppose it's going to come from? Your thinking voice in the middle of the head. You guys, everything you need to teach kids how to go from the reading and the thinking and the inference silhouette head to the constructed response, everything you need is on the head. It's right there. And we talked about that the inference silhouette head is very visual. It's very visible. It's very concrete. It's also temporary. But when you're first teaching kids how to think in these really complex, rigorous ways, we got to record our thoughts. We can't hold all that in our brain. Let us record it, and then we use it to learn how to write responses. Let me keep going. Let me keep going and continue to connect this to standards and to your formulas that you're using for constructed responses. Okay, here's that standard, the grand poopah overall anchor standard. Readers can read closely to determine what the text says explicitly to make logical inferences from it. Okay, that's as a reader. You can read and you can make inferences. As a writer, you then cite specific evidence to support the conclusions that you're writing about. You guys, look, in that one overall standards, they first have to think of the explicit details to make the inference. Then they're going to give you their conclusion or inference and support it with the text details. It's reciprocal. It's all reciprocal. Readers do this, and then we use it to write. Now, if you're using the Yes Ma'am acronym, here's what I want you to see on the screen. The pink M is the inference, right? Author details, that's reading voice, green, and me and my thinking. Okay, watch. Every sentence they write, you're going to lead with the inference will be the first M, and then the author details will be the text evidence. And then the me and my thinking is what I'll use to explain my thinking. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing? This doesn't have to be nearly as hard as I think sometimes we make it. Race, it's the same thing. All the pieces they need are on the silhouette head, people. CER, they're right there. Rap or ace or racer, same thing, everybody. The three pieces we need are all living on the silhouette head. Tell the children this. This is huge. Go ahead, quick, turn the page. Turn the page. Top left. What do you mean tell the children, Christina? How do I tell the children? Well, I think one of the easiest ways is to start and maintain a year-long anchor chart. An anchor chart is like some people have word banks or word walls. It's this ongoing, growing resource for the students in the physical classroom environment. Well, they know readers make inferences. They know green details, thinking voice, inference is the answer. But now teach me how the last thought I had to get the answer will be the first sentence I write. And the second sentence I write will use the author states. And the third sentence will be another green detail, because you got to have at least two. And then the explanation, these details prove blah, blah, blah. That explanation will come from the thinking voice. Everything we use as a reader, we transfer into a written response. Hey, check this out. And if you need to put your letters or want to put your formula letters, I think that's a great idea. Tell them this sentence are these letters. This sentence is this letter. These two sentences will be this letter. All of these anchor charts are part of that secret site, you guys. You can access all of these anchor charts, cut, tape, or do it digitally. You got to tell the children about the reciprocal process. Do you see now why it's so important that we teach how to read and think and use our voices to have thoughts, record our thoughts, figure out big tricky things with an inference, and then save them? Hey, look at number 2 here on my screen in the yellow box. Return to previous silhouette heads. This is so important. Return to previous silhouette heads. In part 1, we read about smoke jumpers in Montana, and we came up with this character trait that they were flexible or adaptive. Well, go back and show them how that now turns into a constructed response. How the first sentence will be adaptive, the second sentence and the third sentences will come from textual evidence, and the fourth sentence will explain the thinking. Now, I want to use the silhouette head that you have there on that page. I want to use those details throughout this entire session, this whole part 2. So I want to quickly review the passage we read. I know seeing the green details and the yellow thought bubbles and the pink answer, probably enough for many of us, but whether you weren't able to be with us for part 1 or you just have slept since then, let me just quickly reread the original passage. Okay, it's not in your handout. It was in the part 1 handout, but it is on my screen. So what we're trying to do is figure out, besides brave, what is another trait that smoke jumpers possess, okay, or demonstrate, a character trait. Okay, so here's the passage. On August 4, 1961, 12 smoke jumpers parachuted to a fire in Montana where strong winds were blowing and the fire raged out of control. Then the wind changed. The fire began to spread in the opposite direction. The smoke jumpers became trapped. The fire exploded like a blowtorch, one jumper said. The 2 crews looked for safety on a burned out section. Some took their shirts and soaked them in water. They wrapped the wet shirts around their heads for protection. Soon, flames surrounded them. The firefighters were in deadly danger until a helicopter appeared from the smoke clouds above and carried them to safety. Okay, so we had previously read that, and we'd gone through the long, laborious work as readers to figure out what, besides brave or courageous, is a trait smoke jumpers possess. We then kind of settled in on their adaptive, they're flexible for different situations. Okay. Pull out previous silhouette heads when you're ready to teach kids how to write constructed responses. We've already done the thinking. Now, show me how to turn it into a written product. You guys, this is huge. Don't ask me the day you're trying to teach me how to write constructed responses or a facet of it. Don't also make me read new text, do new thinking, figure out the inference to then write. You know what? Let's just work on the written product. Let's go back to previous silhouette heads. So save them. Whether we're taking pictures with our iPads, whether you're taking pictures with your cell phone to project them, whatever it is, we need to save those so you can go back to them and say, all right, as readers, you figured this out. But on game day, readers are assessed in writing. You have to be able to articulate this, convey your answer, your thinking in a written product. It doesn't matter that you know it if you can't communicate it. So I want to teach you how to take that thinking and put it into a written product. So go back to previous silhouette heads. All right, you guys, I want to do a quick 90-second chat. I want to know what you're thinking. What are you realizing? What are you excited about? What is also validating? Was it that all the formulas are basically the same? There's just different letters? Was it that as a reader, we do this, and as a writer, we do this, and all of the thinking I need lives on the silhouette head? Was it something else? I'm going to set my timer. We're going to chat for 90 seconds. What's new? What's validating? What is exciting? All righty, let's keep moving. Turn the page, everybody. Page 6. Page 6. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Now that we understand that the constructed response formula, the response they write is all based on the thinking that they did. And we know that regardless of what formula you're using, we need to have a sentence that gives the answer, a couple sentences that give evidence, and a sentence that explains. Okay, so knowing that, now I want to honor that we got a lot of kids who know what every letter stands for, and they can't write what you want. So the rest of our session is going to be, all right, so you want to work on this part of the response, this sentence of the response. Okay, think of it like if then. If your kids are struggling with this, doing these kinds of things, lacking this, then you might utilize this strategy. So as you look at this page 6 here, I tell you in the top left and in the top right, we're working only on the first sentence. I'm going to give you strategies and ideas to improve students' first sentence in a constructed response, the one where they give the answer. All right. And so let's start and talk through 4 different lesson ideas. And I'm not saying all of these need to be taught in a particular order, but read the room. When your kids are struggling with certain facets of the first sentence, then you might employ some of these strategies. Let's start in the top left. Okay, so I want to troubleshoot the kids who aren't restating keywords from the question. They write their constructed response. They just write, I think he is, because he didn't know, or they type it. They just, I think he is, but what? What are you talking? Well, you need to repeat keywords from the question, from the prompt, So how do we convince kids that they need to do this? Well, I realized that there are little things I could have done differently that would have been helpful. And it was all based off of experiences with high school students that I was working with. You know, normally when I want them to answer questions about a reading assignment, I would give them the questions. Now, you might give it to them on a piece of paper, all right? Or it might be a Google Doc, but nonetheless, you give them the questions to respond to, and you expect the answers to kind of go right below that. Well, every time kids didn't use part of the question or keywords from the prompt in their first sentence, I would walk around and I would say, I don't know what you're talking about. You need to use some keywords. What are you responding to? What question? And I had a student one day who, when I said, I don't know what question you were saying, you need to use keywords, his response to me was, Miss Smeckens, why don't you just reread your own question right above my answer, and then you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, well, after I got through the moment, I thought, that is so right. They have no reason to give context or repeat keywords from the question in their answer when their answer is adjacent to the question. They need to understand what it's like to not know what the original question was, not have context. So I want you to consider, for the kids who struggle with this, that you start to give your questions on loose paper or whatever, but you say, hey, don't write down your responses on the handout. I want you to type them, or I want you to write them on notebook paper. But and you know what the kids are going to ask. Their very next question is going to be, do we have to write out the questions? No, just write your responses, you guys. Just write your responses. And so they're like, oh, good. Then they turn them in, and like 4 days later, we go over these responses, but I do not give them the questions back. And now when a kid says, I think he does because he didn't do it, and we're all like, Jonathan, what are you talking about? And he's like, Miss Meckens, we need the questions. No, we don't. We should be able to guess the question based on how you wrote that first sentence. They need to know what it feels like. So I utilize invisible questions. The questions are no longer adjacent to where they write their responses. And I think that's another really big thing I want you to hear. I think you need to change your teacher talk if you've been calling these short answers. 14 or 'cause it does is a short answer. A response just has the sentiment of a complete, cohesive, coherent, longer product. It's still only a handful of sentences, but a response is what I want. I don't want short answers. Okay, now you're going to have kids who, okay, they kind of get it and they might still be struggling. In fact, sometimes the new problem is not that they're writing too little. You know, you taught them how to repeat keywords from the question, so now they are. So they no longer say, in terms of the smoke jumpers, they're adaptive. Okay, that's not enough. That's Goldilocks. That's too little. But now they're being ridiculous. In the text that Christina read aloud about the Montana smoke jumpers, the text demonstrates that they are both brave and adaptive. All right, that's ridiculous. That's way too much. And that's a problem. We have some kids spending more time on repeating keywords and not explaining their thinking, giving evidence for their thinking. Yeah. So we got to find a middle ground. And that's my Goldilocks principle, the middle ground. That you gotta use keywords and give your answer, but you don't have to restate all of the original question. It's the just right portion. Okay, you know what? Bottom left. For some kids, what you're going to realize is they know what you want. They don't know what keywords are. So help us figure it out. Teach us what keywords are. Okay, look at my screen. Pretend, after reading the smoke jumpers passage, here's what we have. Determine the main idea of the passage about smoke jumpers. Okay, so we're just working on the first sentence here, okay? We're just working on the first half of the first sentence. Restate, repeat keywords. Okay, so I know I need to write that first sentence. Here's what I would do to help kids recognize keywords. I think this is overwhelming. But if you put every word on, say, a sticky note, and then talk through which words are important to know what the original question was, or in this case, command. And they're like, well, you better have main idea. And well, it's about smoke jumpers, so you better have smoke jumpers. Do we need to say the passage? No, probably not. We'll just use those words. Okay, now I want you to put in the answer, right? Because they have to actually put in the answer too. But I want you to, as you give the answer, I want you to weave in the words main idea and smoke jumpers. You see what we're doing? Yeah. Let me share one more thing. And this is on the Part 2 secret site. Here's, besides brave, describe another trait that smoke jumpers demonstrate. So instead of main idea, now we're doing character traits. Okay, so ask your kids, which words do we need? Well, we definitely need smoke jumpers. All right, copy and paste that here. This is Google Jamboard, you guys. And we need maybe demonstrate. Okay, maybe we need trait. Okay, which words will give us context? Now move them around and use your text tool and type in the other words that also give your answer. You see what we're doing? Do you see what we're trying to get kids to understand is all the words in the original question we don't need. We just need the key words, the most significant ones for context, for who and what you're talking about. Okay, then when they actually use those key words and they give us their answer, boom, stop. I'm in the bottom right now, the fourth lesson idea. I want them to give me only the general answer and then period. I do not let kids use because in the first sentence. I know you could use because and go into some textual evidence, but I have made it such a big deal that we use the first sentence to do this with the inference from the neck of the silhouette head. And then we're going to go outside in separate sentences with author details. I made such a big deal about this is the first sentence and these are the second sentences that I don't want them to connect them because sends us right into details from the text. And I just want them to say, another trait smoke jumpers demonstrate is that they are flexible and adaptive, period. No becauses. Just stop. Just stop. Yeah, this is huge. This is huge. It's a topic sentence. You see that, right? We now have just a basic topic sentence. In the bottom right, we're going to kind of look through what that simple answer or first sentence could be. If we put this all together, we decide which words we need and we put it into a sentence. Smoke jumpers demonstrate that they are adaptive, period. No becauses. If you think trait needs to be part of that, I don't disagree. Okay, so maybe we reword it. Smoke jumpers demonstrate the trait of adaptability. Okay, there's no answer. They're not trying to guess the sentence. It's the sentiment of the sentence, and it's giving the answer with no evidence. This serves as a topic sentence. The first sentence of a constructed response paragraph is the topic sentence. I want the scorer to say, how do you know? Why do you think that? According to the passage. Here we go with textual evidence that I pulled from my reading voice. Let's go ahead and turn the page and let's talk about what that text evidence might look like. Let's look at a few more if-then lesson ideas. So we're going to talk about the second and third sentences. And I do, at least initially, require students to write their textual evidence sentences separately. I want to know one sentence is evident. This is a separate. I think sometimes they, giant run on and they said the same thing 2 times. No. So I'm going to literally have a second and a third sentence. Let's look on the left there. We need the kids to introduce their evidence. And you know what? This really isn't a problem for most kids anymore. No, they recognize that they need to give their answer and why they think that, textual evidence. And this whole idea has gotten easier for them because you gave them sentence starters. You told them how to start the second and third sentences. The text states, it was written that, one example from the reading. And now all of a sudden, kids know how to start. Right now, if they didn't have those sentence starters, then they have these words and phrases from their reading voice on the outside of their silhouette head. They have these words and phrases, actual words from the text, but how do I turn that into a sentence? Oh, introduce your evidence according to the passage, and then we'll go into that. phrase. Oh, okay. So this basic sentence starter approach has really been working for most kids. And I just want to validate, yes, this is where you start. However, I don't think we're quite done. I think we can continue to improve the quality of evidence sentences. Well, one of the things this gal posted her sentence stems so that kids had them, right there in the room. But one of the things we need to do is remember that text doesn't talk. So make sure that when you give kids statements or sentence starters to introduce their evidence, that we don't say the text says, because text doesn't talk. Text states, it includes, the text might present. The author wrote. The author doesn't say, he's not speaking out loud. He wrote, he implied, he describes such and such. So that's one way to elevate already the sophistication of these evidence sentences. I also think we need to talk to kids about what is the strongest evidence. We want to make sure that they realize every detail on the outside of the silhouette head isn't going to make the best evidence. Bottom left of this page. You know that statement that all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles are not squares? Okay, I'm going to apply that now with text evidence. All evidence is a detail from the reading, but all details from the reading will not work as evidence. You see the problem? We have kids cherry picking. When it's time for them to write the according to the passage sentence, they just go in and they're just cherry picking phrases like, dude, that doesn't even fit. That doesn't even match. That doesn't even support. What are you doing? Oh, it came from the reading. All right. So if this is a situation you want to talk to kids, and this again is why it's so valuable to have their silhouette heads, their actual thinking on paper. You saw this detail and it made you think this. You saw this detail and it made you think this. Okay, now, which details were most helpful? Out of the ones you wrote down, which details got you like, oh, when I saw that, I knew adaptive was going to be their trait. Okay, what are those, the most helpful details? Because all details aren't equal. They're not equally helpful. Okay, now I really want to raise the sophistication of their written responses. And I want to talk through this second and third sentence when they give the evidence, that we teach them how to blend the sentences of evidence, the blend of sentences. Okay, they're using the sentence starter, the text states, and then they pop in whatever words they pulled from the text. And then they do another one, another detail from the reading, and they pop in the phrase, the word, the detail from the text. Okay, it's okay. But if you're trying to get kids stronger, you got to teach them how to blend the evidence. What do you mean by that? Okay, let me show you. So that would mean that we teach them the terms kerplunk. That's what I call it, when they just pop in the phrase or detail from the text versus blending it. Okay, so we read Henry David Thoreau, and we're writing and we're giving evidence. All right, and this is kerplunked. Thoreau states, or you could make that say, the text states, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. And so you see what we have here, right? We have my sentence starter, and then the whole rest of the sentence is evidence. It's all green, reading voice green. It's all author words. That's a kerplunk. What we want to teach kids is how to blend. The sentence they write, we want a sentence starter, that's your own words, and then we want the author's words, but we don't want you to just kerplunk in the whole thing. Just just keywords from the author and blend it among your own words. You see that yarn there? The green I'm and the yellow. I'm going to start according to the passage. It states that da 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 da, and I'm going to use some keywords, and then I'll continue and some more keywords. You guys, this is what this could look like. Thoreau's retreat to Walden Pond was motivated by his desire to live deliberately and to face only the essential facts of life. You know what is happening here? This, teaching kids how to do this, requires a 5-step process of paraphrasing. That's what we're teaching kids to do. Okay, now wait. Some of you are like, no, we don't want them to paraphrase. We want them to quote. I know. They are. They're going to quote key words, but we don't want them quoting whole sentences, or worse, 2, 3, 4 sentences. They're just copy and pasting and kerplunking in there. No, there's got to be more thinking from the reader. So teach them how to paraphrase the author's idea, and we're still going to have evidence in quotes. Let me show you. Let me show you what this would look like. But again, you got to teach the process. So for me, it's a 5-step process. First, they've read the text, of course. They know their answer, okay? They know what they want to say. And look, number 1, they have to figure out which words from that sentence, the author's sentence, which words or phrases do they want to use. And so if I go backwards for a second and look at that Thoreau, to live deliberately, I want to use that phrase. And essential facts of life, I want to use that phrase. Okay, kind of like we did with keywords on the Google Jamboard with the pink sticky notes when restating a question. It's going to be the same idea. Figure out your keywords, and then without looking at the text, just your keywords. Now I want you to compose an oral sentence that starts with, the text states, but don't read it. No, just use those keywords. But what about it? Paraphrase it. What did the text say? And so maybe it's the text states that their first thought, now I'm thinking of the smoke jumpers, that their first thought was to move to a burned out section for safety. Do you see? I knew I wanted to use the burned out section, but I did all that without looking. I didn't say it exactly how the author did. And once you say it, then you write it. Okay, let me show you. Watch this. And you can jot it in the bottom right corner. Okay, so I want it. The keywords I want to use, look to the burned out section. So the text states, after they were trapped, the text states they looked to the burned out section as a possible place of safety. I pulled those words, and so I quote them. Okay, I know I want to use this part, wrapped wet shirts around their heads for protection. So, or at least some of those key words. So how can I say it? So I'm using those keywords, but I'm also putting it together with my own. The text also states that they wrapped wet shirts around their heads for protection. This idea of putting them together. If you only say the text states that, it's a kerplunk. The text also states it's a kerplunk. But look at this, if we put it together with the paraphrasing, check this out. So you see how it's just all yellow and then it's green? Now look at this. Yellow, green, blend. After getting trapped, this text states that their first thought was to move to safety in a burned out section. And don't forget, then you go back, you look in the text to verify which words exactly were the authors, and you put quotes around them. So that's why there are quotes around those. The whole thing wasn't, but I paraphrased his sentiment and used some of his precise quotes. The text also states that they wrapped wet shirts around their heads for protection. That's a kerplunk. That's all yellow. Then it's just a sentence starter in green. Come on, what can we do? The text also states that they soaked their shirts and wrapped them around their heads for added protection. Do you see what we're doing? I think we got to teach kids how to do this. And again, go back and add the quotes. Hey, let me wrap up this page with just a few little tips and tricks that might be some additional lesson ideas. And that is, require that they only work on giving evidence for in one sentence. Don't require that they give 2 sentences of evidence. Just start with 1 sentence of evidence. 1 sentence of evidence that's blended with your own words. Get good at that. Then up the expectation to 2 sentences. But you guys, I think sometimes we overwhelm them with too much and then they just get her done. And I just really want you to think about this 1 sentence. Or if you're like, I'm going to make them give me 2 sentences of blended evidence, Christina. Okay, then pair them up. Let us at least work together on this. It's hard. Blending evidence is hard. It's sophisticated. It's what we want, but you've got to ease into it. It's part of the scaffold. By requiring multiple sentences of evidence, a separate sentence of evidence, we avoid the Scooby-Doo inference. And that's where kids, they see one detail and they immediately think this is the problem. They immediately think this is the inference. They immediately think this is the trait. As soon as you require 2 and 3 and 4 pieces of evidence, they can't have the Scooby-Doo moment. My connection to Scooby-Doo, I learned from my associate, Christy McCullough, and she says that, Shaggy and Scooby at the very beginning of an episode see one detail and think it's a ghost. But the rest of the episode is Freddie, Daphne, and Velma collecting details, putting them together to figure out a much more logical inference. Okay, so we don't want one detail because that's a Scooby-Doo moment in the works. You also, when you start to expect more sentences, want to give them additional sentence starters. Also states, in addition, okay? And I do expect 2 separate sentences, and I'll tell you why when we move to elaboration. And finally, as they're writing those 2 separate sentences, let's make sure that the evidence they're pulling is from 2 different places in the passage. I think sometimes they write 2 sentences, they use different words, but they basically say the same thing. So I need you to pull a detail from this part and pull a detail from a different part to support that inference. So different parts of the original text is where you're going to find the evidence or the stronger evidence. Okay, you guys. So we've talked through the first sentence and then the second and third support sentences. I want you to review pages 6 and 7, any notes you took, and I'm curious regarding that first sentence where they give the answer and regarding the second and third sentences where they give text evidence. What ingredients do your students lack? When they write, what aren't they doing in the first, second, or third sentence? Which lessons will be most applicable to your readers and writers? Let's give each other a little feedback. Let's think through kind of your first steps of implementation. What lessons will you teach? 90 seconds. All right, let's continue. Let's continue. Turn the page, page 8. All right, so we're now going to talk about the fourth sentence in a constructed response, the explanation sentence, which for a lot of us has been the hard part. And so I want to give you, again, 3 lesson concepts, ideas, takeaways that might kind of shore up some of your students' weaknesses. All right, so first, top left, we have to get the kids to understand, again, the purpose behind the explanation sentence. And that is to assume the reader doesn't get it. And what I mean by doesn't get it, he doesn't get how this evidence goes with this inference, this answer. He doesn't see the connection there. And so you have to explain it. And you might even talk about times where, have you ever in class, students given an answer to something and the teacher said, what do you mean? And then you started to explain and he or she said, yes, you're right. Your explanation is what clarified and connected. You have to go into a constructed response, writing the first, second, third sentence, assuming the reader doesn't see how these details support that inference. So if you assume that, then you're ready, you're invested in giving that final sentence. Another analogy for kids to maybe relate to the value of the final sentence is to talk through the idea of a joke. Okay, well, let's read this real fast. So, Civil War jokes, I generally don't find them funny. Now, I show that to some kids and they'll say, I don't get it. And that is exactly the experience we have to presume the teacher, the scorer, whoever's reading our writing is thinking. I don't get it. What's your point? If you've ever needed a joke explained and then you got it, that's exactly what we're talking about. You have to explain your thinking. It's automatic. Just assume that the scorer doesn't get it. So you're actually going to ask yourself, what do I mean by this? How are these details relevant? How does this relate? I'm going to ask myself a question. Why do I think this? How do I know? This is the idea. I had one kid one time say, when I was asking him to do that, he was like, it's like I hear you in my head every time I write the first sentence and then the second sentence and then the third sentence. It's like I hear Mrs. Meckens say, why do you think that? Explain your thinking, and then he goes on, and that's exactly what we need. We need them to see the purpose of the final sentence. It's, you didn't get the joke, explain it. The scorer didn't get the connection, explain it. Okay, so now when we talk about explaining the connection, top right of page 8 here, it's literally a comparison to connect the dots, or so I think. So we collected these details, okay, and we put them in sentences 2 and 3. And we gave this answer in the first sentence. So we gave this answer, and then we put these details right after it. And the whole point of the explanation sentence is to say, well, how did you get from there, these details, to here? How did you get there? What is the journey of your thinking? Watch this. Well, these details made me think this. And then those thoughts got me here. Oh, so what are you supposed to do in the final sentence? Just explain the journey of your thinking. Go back to previous silhouette heads. The middle of the head thinking voice, thoughts, comments that you jotted, the annotation thoughts in the margins, there it is. That's going to be what we use for this explanation sentence, you guys. Now, when you write that sentence, it needs to have 3 parts. One sentence, 3 parts. Not hard. It's just a matter of knowing how to construct this sentence. So let's look at this third lesson idea. Okay, so you need to explain the connection between the details and the inference. You need to explain it, and you need to do it in 3 parts. So the first part of the sentence is going to use a sentence starter. these details, this shows, this demonstrates. Now, again, you can get more sophisticated and wean off of sentence starters. But for those who aren't giving you a final sentence at all right now, they are very helpful. So these details show that smoke jumpers are, okay, now I fill in with my inference. So the first part of this final sentence is to restate the answer. But a lot of kids stop right there. They think that's their explanation. You didn't explain anything. All you did was repeat the first sentence, basically. So what they have to do now is connect it to their thinking. Okay, well, if we're making a connection, then we should use a connecting word. Look at the yellow bubbles. I'm thinking it reminds me of, so I need to connect this thinking to the answer. I need to show this connection. What I'm going to do is use because. Look at that. I'm going to show how adaptive. Did you see the flip and the arrows? Look down the screen. Okay, so I'm thinking this. It got me to adaptive. I'm supposed to explain, how did you get to adaptive? Well, look back up. That thinking is how I got connect the dots. And now use your because. I don't let kids use because in the first sentence. It lives in the final sentence. That's where they get to use it as a connection between the neck answer and the inside the head thinking. Because connects it. Then pull on key words, pull on helpful thoughts in the head. So if I go back to my smoke jumpers here, okay, some of my in the head thoughts: had to try something different, had to move where it's more safe, had to think quickly. It was out of nowhere. They didn't expect it. It was unpredictable. Those are all thoughts I had while reading. The details show that smoke jumpers are adaptive because fires are unpredictable. That's why they have to be adaptive. I just did it. You don't have to use because. You don't have to say it like that. I could change it, use as a result instead, as a different connecting word. As a result of the unexpected and the unpredictable nature of their job. Are you seeing it? You guys, they've got to record their thinking because they want it for the explanation. Okay, now wait a minute. I want to do one more thing. Let's go to page 9. Because what we have right now is a really good basic constructed response. And it truly is basic. What we need to do now is teach kids how to elaborate. Now, I say now, but you don't teach kids how to elaborate on evidence until they're giving you inference with evidence and explanation. Then you teach elaboration, okay? I don't need explanation if they don't give evidence. I don't need evidence if they can't do the first sentence. It's literally a scaffold. You don't teach race in a lesson. This is days and days of direct instruction with lots of practice time. But when they're ready and they've achieved the basic race, the basic CER, the basic MAM or RAP or whatever your formula is, great. Now we've got to move beyond that. We've got to recognize that to pass, there needs to be more thinking from the students, literally more thinking voice, more student words than author direct quotes. Literally, we should have twice as much thinking by the reader to evidence from the author. Now, look at the screen, and you have this on your handout. If we do the first sentence, that's me and my thinking, that's the inference. So we'll make that yellow. It could be pink, but we'll make it yellow. Okay, then evidence, sentence, and then my explanation. Right now, that left, that's 50-50, people. That's 50-50. That is not double the amount of yellow to evidence, elaboration to evidence, reader words to author words. That's a problem. It's good for the basic and the starting point, but it's not game day ready. They have to have more elaboration, more thinking of their own, supported with author details. Look at the one on the right. Give me and my thinking gives you the inference. So as yellow thinking, then I'm going to use author details, but then I'm going to elaborate on those. I'm going to tell you what they mean. I'm going to tell you why they're important. I'm going to tell you their significance. I'm going to predict something about them. Then I'm going to give more green details and I'm going to elaborate on that. And then then I'll conclude this. Do you see the yellow to green now? You see what I mean by double? This is huge. Now, let me just pause for a minute and reiterate that you don't worry about adding elaboration until we get the basic, but we've got to move past the basic. That's not game day ready. We need more thinking from the students. And I believe using color, highlighter color, font color, digital, paper, whatever, but using color helps kids really start to recognize what is their ratio of thinking to author details. My words, author words. Thinking voice to reading voice. So color can be huge. All right, so that said, you'll also want to remind them that this added elaboration is also for the reader. I know you know how the evidence fits, but the scorer doesn't. So it's not for you. It's to further elaborate, give some specific connections, evidence by evidence. Okay, so if you are excited about an anchor chart and you're even thinking of maybe putting your formula letters on it, great. But this anchor chart we've been looking at is very basic. What it needs to go to is something more like this. Do you see what happens? Do you see how we're adding the elaboration in between? More yellow. And again, I say that, ma'am, that's a starting point. You've got to now totally mess up the acronym to add in more meat elaboration. Race is a starting point. Then it gets totally messed up. Yeah, you guys, don't get caught up in which letter were you. No, it's about, do you have these three parts? Great. Now we're going to blow it out of the water with more thinking, more reasoning, more explanation, elaboration, clarification. Formulas are only starting points. So when you want to teach kids how to add elaboration, what I would look to do is give them some universal sentence starters. All right, listen, sentence starters have been working for us. Formulaic writing, which is bad most of the time, is so relevant in this unique type of academic writing. They have to say a lot of things in a concise, succinct, cohesive, coherent paragraph. And a formula is great. And part of formulas, sentence starter. It's great. Again, we can play with sentence structure and get more sophisticated after we get the ingredients down. But for kids, how do I give you elaboration? Just give me a sentence starter and watch how I can finish the thought. I think the two most universal, meaning they work for almost any evidence you would have put there, would simply be, this is important because, or this matters because. Boom. So I put a detail and then this is important. I follow it with a me and my thinking explanation, elaboration. The evidence came from the reading voice, but where am I getting these? Inside the head. The thinking voice is what you're explaining. So remember the smoke jumpers every time, and this was back in part one. So if you weren't with us in part one, then this will be a little bit fast. But for the rest of us, we read a little, we had this thought. 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 Okay, so now here's what happens. We put those thoughts together to get the answer, but when it's time to elaborate, look at that first piece of evidence. After getting trapped, the text states that their first thought was to move to safety in a burned out section. Okay, the text states that's evidence. Okay, I'm going to go back to my silhouette head where the burned out section detail was, because I need to elaborate on this. So what was I thinking about that? Oh, they had to try something different. They had to move somewhere safe. Okay, let me say that. So somehow I have to turn that thought into a sentence. This is important because smoke jumpers have to be ready to adjust plans and try something different. Second piece of evidence, second green. The text also states they soaked their shirts, wrapped them around their heads for added protection. Go back to your silhouette head. What thought did you have? Well, they had to think quickly to protect themselves. Okay, use that. Turn that into a sentence. This matters because smoke jumpers have to think. You see what we're doing? See what we're doing? And this Google Doc, remember I talked about colors of highlighters or change your font? This is a Google slide where kids can type their inference and then give their evidence and elaborate, give next piece of evidence and elaborate, and then give their explanation. Look at all the yellow. It's the ratio of thinking to evidence that we've got to increase. And finally, bottom right, for the most sophisticated readers and writers, you don't want them to just use that universal, this matters because this is important, because you want them to start to recognize that the type of elaboration, like the sentence starter, depends on the type of detail they had right before. Depending on the type of detail, a certain kind of elaboration or sentence starter works pretty well. And this brings some variety. Otherwise, everybody just keeps saying, this is important because, this is important because, and this is important because, this is also important because, and everybody starts out of the same. So for those of you ready, or when you're ready to teach kids other sentence starters, let's be more intentional. Let's not just cherry pick any sentence starter. If they are dropping a detail that is figurative, like a simile, that's part of their evidence is this simile. Well, then interpret it, meaning say, this means, you see that number one, look to the right there. This means, in other words, there's your elaboration sentence. Or if it's, I'm looking at number 5, the piece of evidence there that you just dropped is evidence for your point that things are going to get bad, and you dropped that evidence, and so you have to explain, how does that prove that things are going to get bad? Number 5, well, if this continues, then see what's happening. Teach me when to use which type. Oh, now I have sentence structure variety. Now I have elaboration techniques. I think a lot of times we tell kids to elaborate, but we don't teach them how. I think there are 9 ways. I'm sure there are others, but so far I've come up with 9 ways to elaborate on this detail. And I don't think all of the elaboration techniques work for every detail. I think certain details fit with certain elaboration techniques. So slowly teach me those over the course of the year. Watch what happens when I'm explaining my thinking in science and in social studies and in ELA and all my other subjects or courses. All right, there's a mini poster set of each of these 9 on the Secret site. Love to share that with you and as you teach your kids. And one more quick connection here, and that is that if the detail is like this, then you're going to elaborate like that on that Google slide, Google Doc. Oh, it's so great, you guys. This is how we get kids to really recognize the ingredients to a well-written, constructed response. As we finish this last page, I just want to point out that the smoke jumper's basic response there in the top right, it's good, but it's not game day ready. It doesn't have enough elaboration. It doesn't have the ratio we're looking for. So for those of you that want an answer, give me the answer key, Christina. What would be your final constructed response for that smoke jumpers passage and question? This is an option, but look at how much longer, look how more thorough, look at all of the thinking. Between the pink and the yellow, this thing is dominated by reader thinking. All right, one more chat. One more 90-second chat. I want you to kind of think through what you learned about elaboration and that explanation sentence. And what was your most valuable takeaway from pages 8, 9, and 10? Most valuable. Is it just something you learn, like new understanding, new appreciation? Or was it, no, this lesson idea is going to be huge? Or maybe it's a certain resource. You're like, this is going to be game changing. What was your biggest takeaway from pages 8, 9, and 10? 90 seconds. All right, that's going to wrap us up for part 2. Part 1, reading, thinking, making inferences. Part 2, this session, how to take that thinking and put it into a short constructed response. Part 3 is going to take inferences and how to make syntheses. We're going to go back to big thinking in part 3. Hey, email me anytime. I'll linger in the chat even when the video ends. But beyond that, thanks for joining me, and have a great rest of your day.